Today, we will be looking into class, capital, and consumption, more specifically how technology aids consumption across classes. First, let's take a look at what a class is. A social class is a system of ordering society whereby people are divided into categories based on their perceived social status and/or economic value. Class designates a social and economic position, and it always involves an antagonistic relationship between classes. What is consumption? Consumption is the process by which goods and services are, at last, put to final use by the people. Consumption is at the end of the line of economic activities. Before we start analysing these concepts in modern society, we must first look back to examples of consumption across classes before technology as we know it today. The medieval ages. Medieval society was highly stratified. In a time where famine was commonplace and societal hierarchies were often brutally enforced, food was an important marker of social status in a way that has no equivalent today in most developed countries. According to the ideological norm, society consisted of three estates of the realm: commoners, that is the working class, by far the largest group, nobility, and the clergy. The relationship between the classes was strictly hierarchical, with the nobility and clergy claiming worldly and spiritual ownership over commoners. Within the nobility and clergy, there were also a number of rankings, ranging from kings and popes to dukes and bishops and their subordinates. One was expected to remain in one's social class, and to respect the authority of the ruling classes. Political power was displayed not just by rule, but also by displaying wealth. Nobles dined on fresh game seasoned with exotic spices and displayed refined table manners. Meanwhile, commoners could make do with coarse barley bread, salt pork and beans, and were not expected to display etiquette. Even dietary recommendations were different. The diet of the upper class was considered to be as much as a requirement of the refined physical constitution as a sign of economic reality. The digestive system of a lord was held to be more discriminating than that of his subordinates and demand finer foods. Now, let's fast forward a bit to what some will consider the birth of mass consumption and consumerism, the Industrial Revolution. The main features involved in the Industrial Revolution were technological, socio-economic, and cultural advances. The technological changes included the following: the use of new basic materials, chiefly iron and steel, the use of new energy sources, including both fuels and motive power, such as coal, the steam engine, electricity, petroleum, and the internal combustion engine, and the invention of new machines, such as the spinning jenny and the power loom, that permitted increased production with a smaller expenditure of human energy. These technological changes made possible the tremendously increased use of natural resources and the mass production of manufactured goods. With increased food production, the population could be fed at lower prices with less effort than ever before. The surplus of food meant that families could use the money they saved to purchase newly manufactured goods, and mass consumption was born. This process of increasing and refining production methods continued on into the late modern periods. With new materials and products being formed, new inventions arose: radio, phone, television, personal computers. These initially served as symbols of status in the form of a consumer product, with only the upper class being able to afford them. Let's look at radio, for example. Radios became household items in the early 1920s and popular around 1924 when people were tuning in to political conventions. At this time, only around 20% of households had a radio. We can assume that this was the upper or middle class. A little more than 10 years later, 80% of households now had a radio. The unique thing about these new technological products is they also served as another channel that products could be marketed through, which leads us to the modern day. Now we are connected more than ever before. With smartphones and the internet being readily accessible to almost everyone, endless amounts of information can now be consumed regardless of class. In fact, it is considered so ingrained in our development that in 2016, the United Nations Human Rights Council passed a resolution that condemns unequivocal measures to intentionally prevent or disrupt access to dissemination of information online. That's fantastic news, right? Well, yes and no. So, it's clear that technology and consumption go hand in hand, a symbiotic relationship between corporations and consumers that is inherently parasitic. The internet bridges the gap between all people, but having something this accessible comes at a cost, and that cost is your personal information. Every single time that you log into a certain website or purchase a product, information about you is tracked, compiled, and sold to companies that are targeting products to sell to you specifically. Over the past couple of years, in the hope of reaching the maximum number of consumers possible, product advertising has become increasingly automated. Think about this for a second. When was the last time you said something aloud or searched for a specific thing on a browser, and the next thing you know, your social media is inundated with ads for this particular product. It's clear that you are being targeted based on recent information collected, and it is methodical in the way that it is done. With the sheer number of automated product advertising today, it wasn't long until slip-ups were made. A prime example of this was a flaw in YouTube's advertising system, an event popularly known as the adpocalypse. You see, YouTube's advertising system was mainly reliant on user flagging, which was unreliable and inconsistent. This meant that companies' products were being advertised on some particularly unsettling or outrageous content. This resulted in a large societal backlash against the companies supporting this content, and in turn, resulting in companies pulling advertising from YouTube. This, ultimately, was a problem the advertisers brought upon themselves by overreaching and oversaturating. Now, however, advertisers are much more cautious with who they affiliate themselves with, meaning that only the most viewed and popular videos are monetized. The most popular videos are notorious for the promotion of conspicuous consumption, which in turn only leads to more issues. Conspicuous consumption isn't a new premise. It is the concept of spending money on the acquiring of luxury goods and services to publicly display economic power and the accumulative wealth of the buyer. This is a tale as old as humanity itself. If you remember back to the start of this video, wealthy nobility in medieval and ancient times often displayed power over lower classes through clothing, luxuries, and overeating. Nowadays, conspicuous consumption is incredibly prevalent in the news, in the music we listen to, and the things we watch. Some more obvious than others. Think about some of the examples of wealth you might see in a rap video. So, how are companies promoting cautiously through conspicuous consumption? Well, an increasing amount of vloggers and YouTubers are being backed by shadow companies. That is, a relationship that is not specifically stated, but is providing funding to promote conspicuous consumption and the associated lifestyle with it. You only have to look at a vlogger's most popular videos to quickly deduct that they are normally the ones with the most opulent products and extravagant experiences. This appeal to wealth and the lifestyle associated with it, once again, isn't something new. However, with the increased repeated exposure through social media and the internet, these aspirational lifestyles are more sought after than ever. In fact, these consumeristic aspirations are now known in popular culture by the term affluenza. It is described as a painful, contagious, socially transmitted condition of overload, debt, anxiety, and waste resulting from a dogged pursuit of more. Companies and individuals alike are preying on these aspirations and insecurities to generate as much following and power as possible. This is a self-perpetuating process, with the consumers being the only one that really suffers. Without a doubt, technology aids and affords consumption across classes. However, with the rate that both have been growing, there is an increasing risk to societal and mental issues as a byproduct of capitalistic values. With the current rate of progress, what do you think the future will look like for consumption?